I'm Meghan Taft, limited licensed psychologist and crisis negotiator, and you are listening to the Crisis Cop podcast on the Two Guys Talking podcast network.
Welcome to the Crisis Cop podcast. I'm your host, Pat Doring, and today in the podcast, we're going to be doing something a little different. We've been doing our Legends series. We also did a What Cops Watch episode, which we're going to be doing more of those next year. But this episode's a little different. It's going to be called Student Spotlight. So join us today is Meghan Taft. Welcome, Meghan.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So Meghan was a student, and I believe it was April of 2023. Does that sound about right?
That does sound right. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Did a little bit of digging. I had to go through all my rosters. But so Meghan, just real quick, just give us a little bit of background. Tell us about yourself.
I am a limited licensed psychologist and have done some work with law enforcement in the past. I previously worked at a community mental health system and did a little bit of everything in those roles. So from outpatient therapy to crisis work, supervising jail services, and eventually our CIT or crisis intervention team within the county that I was working in. I've since transitioned roles to, I now am an instructor and program manager at Wayne State University in Michigan. And we actually provide training, 40-hour training for crisis providers across the entire state of Michigan. So that's been a new focus of mine. I've had, again, quite an opportunity to work with law enforcement historically in more of the CIT and co-responder capacity. Mm-hmm. And then obviously joined the negotiator team in 2023.
All right. So let's obviously with your background, but what kind of drew you into like wanting to take the negotiation course?
Yeah. So I thought about that question. I thought I'm going to have to come up with a good response because I'll be in complete transparency. It wasn't something I was very interested in initially. So there was a sergeant at the time who was overseeing the negotiator team, and he had gone through the CIT class, and I knew him in some of that capacity. And he reached out to me after he had taken a course and said, they are bringing mental health professionals onto teams, and I think that you should be on our team. And I initially was like, I don't know that that's for me. Really didn't know a ton about it. And to be honest, what did that look like? How did mental health professionals contribute to teams? Just being pretty unsure of that. And, but he kind of sold it. He was like, you think you can contribute and, be an asset to our team. And so I agreed to at least like go through the training and see what that would be like.
It's good you brought this up too, because when I first started, we had no mental health people on our team. And it's something I'm seeing more and more of is these teams incorporating mental health just as another tool to have in the toolbox. And it's so important, I think, just to have that other asset there to help the team along.
Yeah, absolutely. I had seen obviously the collaboration and CIT work be so effective. And so that's part of what sold it to me as well. Obviously, at least in my mind, initially, I was thinking, negotiator cases are so much more intense, possibly. And that was maybe part of my hesitation initially. But, obviously, feeling like I could contribute or be valuable to a team was also really enticing to me to be a part of it.
Right. And just so you're aware, I don't know if you actually had the scenario or not, but producer Mike is Agent Zero in our scenario. Some of the scenarios we run on a Thursday, we put our students through scenario days. Did you have the Agent Zero scenario, if you remember?
Did he keep saying red or blue? Red or blue?
Oh, was that? That was me, I think, I believe.
That was you.
I was the
Okay.
agent 0 that time. I think we were short role players, so yeah. So
Okay.
you have to deal with my craziness, I don't
I
know
did have that. That was
what's
my
yours.
scenario. I
Yeah.
vividly remember that
Yep.
scenario.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, that was
that was me for yeah, uh-huh. So, I take some pages off Aiden Zero's thing, but yeah, so
Mhm.
let's just dive a little bit into the class, like, what were your expectations or what were you thinking or
Again, I don't know that I went in with a ton of expectations. I know, from my history, sometimes merging into cop culture when you're not law enforcement uh, can be difficult, right? And so, again, wanting to learn more about how I would contribute or what that would look like. And again, knowing that I was going into the class with not a lot of foundational law enforcement knowledge, right? I didn't have some of that obviously others in the class had. Um, so I was unsure about that. I was also unsure. I took a 40-hour class that was all virtual. Um, so I was
right,
unsure about, what that would look like. I obviously had some training already in active listening and motivational interviewing, right, as part of my clinical training. So those weren't necessarily new concepts to me, although presented differently, definitely learned in a different way. But yeah, kind of, I guess I would describe it as just being unsure. How was law enforcement going to respond to somebody not law enforcement in the
right.
class? And then how obviously was I going to take the information and merge it into a team that had never had a mental health professional on it before?
Right. And so you bring up so we do in-person classes and then we all know COVID, right? COVID hit
Yeah,
and we really wanted to figure out how can we keep doing these classes, right? Because we still got to train. We can't just like abandon
sure.
training, right? So we
Yes.
came up with the idea of, hey, let's try to do this online. And it's funny because a lot of people have the same, like online class. How are we going to do this? And I think we've gotten it. So I think we've done like I want to say almost 20 classes online now and I think
Yeah.
we've gotten it down to where it's a really great learning environment, and the uniqueness is we now have people from different countries involved in class, and the people we pull into these online classes, you're not gonna get that in an in-person class. I think that's something that's really unique about the online platform.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I will give you, now that I do some online teaching of my own, I borrow things that I learned because you do create a very engaging environment that students, you can't just like disengage with the course
Right,
because
right.
you're going to be called on or you're going to be asked a question or, like I vividly remember that as part of my feeling like I was engaged for the full 40 and not feeling like like it was easy just to skip out on parts or whatnot. But no, I will give you major kudos. I do feel like you create an environment that helps all learners be present for 40 hours of virtual learning.
So we do some different exercises. Now you said you had a little bit of background, obviously, with your CIT stuff and active listening, but we kind of day 2 throw you into our back to backs. How did that feel, and what was that experience? Just, hey, we go over active listening, the afternoon of the first day to give you a little, here's active listening, and then that second day, we kinda throw you right into the fire and, okay, now practice these skills.
Yeah, I remember practicing ALS and actually getting a message from Gary when we were practicing it, like, "You're pretty good at this." And I was like, "Well, thanks." Um, Again, I had the opportunity to not only practice it in the past, but teach it in the past as well. So that I feel like I had a sort of an advantage in that respect. But again, I don't know that, I don't feel like I've mastered any of this. I'm always learning, right? And there's always a different way to do it and to learn from others. And so anytime I think you take a training and get to do, scenario based training, which I will tell you, clinicians don't get a lot of in their
Mhm.
training. So, the opportunities to do that are welcomed and then get the feedback, right? What did I do well? What didn't land? And that's always, I think, super insightful. And I appreciate the back to backs. I appreciate the opportunity to, continue to practice ALS and learn from others, but also learn like what I can do differently.
And I think that's the biggest thing you said you have to practice this stuff 'cause it's such a perishable skill that if you don't practice it, you're almost gonna forget how to do it. So it's something you almost have to change the way you communicate every day. If you use these active listening skills, it's gonna get you that practice.
Oh yeah, I could not agree with that more. I think that was, a huge course takeaway is you do learn a lot in those 40 hours, right? And you learn various active listening skills and just different approaches. But if you don't use it, you'll lose it. There's no doubt. So I know for myself, it's been I'm a part of the team who, knock on wood, we don't get called out, super frequently. So it is about how do I continue to practice skills or read or do any, keep engaged with the work. Because yeah, it was 2+ years ago I went through this training.
Right.
But staying current is important.
So just kind of going back, was there any particular lesson or something like a block of instruction where it just is kind of like just one of those like, I never really thought about that, or it was kind of like one of those light bulb moments.
Yeah, I think I had a couple. An exercise in particular that I vividly, like, really remember and this stuck with me is the buyer seller
Oh yeah,
exercise.
yeah,
And again, I had heard of the 80/20 rule. You practice it, and I wasn't called on to do that exercise as part of class. Actually, one of my colleagues that I knew was, and she responded just like everyone else responds, right, for
right,
their
right.
full 40, 45 seconds. That was really eye-opening. That exercise in particular, I think again, I've actually borrowed that and taken that back to my team to do some like mini training with. I'm like, we can really conceptualize this differently. You think about the 80/20 rule a lot differently after that exercise. It's really simple, right? But it's like, gosh, it makes you think um, a lot differently. I will also say some of the training topics that were really specific to working with SWAT teams was really important to me. Like understanding that structure that, again, I didn't necessarily have a basis going
Right.
into that, or how teams communicate or work together. So that information, in addition to um, obviously some of those exercises, were super valuable and helpful for me.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned 80/20 before in some of our previous podcasts, but just kind of to reiterate what we say when we say 80/20 is you should be listening 80% of the time and only talking 20% of the time. And when you start kind of we call it the 80/20 rule because when you violate that rule, that's when you're really not listening. And the buyer seller thing is so and everybody does it. I mean, I think maybe we have 1 out of 90 that actually listens. Everybody else talks because they want to sell their
Mhm.
product, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think people come from that place of selling, like, or place of advocacy, right? From like a
Right.
genuine, they want to help and feel like they are, but like, wow, how powerful to realize that, listening can actually be more impactful for 40 seconds, and how people can even shift how they might quote unquote sell something based on just the knowledge of where that person's coming from. um,
Right.
so yeah, powerful exercise.
And then you brought up also working with the tactical team, and I think sometimes people
Yeah.
forget that, that you have to have that tactical element there because if there's no threat of force, then we could maybe never resolve this kind of a thing. And it's so important to be able to work with them and understand, sometimes they have a different mission goal than we do, but at the end of the day, we're all one team, and we had to figure out how do we align ourselves for that one goal, which is, to save those people's lives. So that's always important to remember that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, the concept of those tactical teams was completely foreign to me. I had no basis as to how they, are structured, excuse me, or kind of their mission or their training. And so getting just a better understanding of that obviously helps you work more collaboratively with them in the long run, right? We want to be able, like you said, to work work together, but I have to understand where they're coming from, as well, and what, how they're trained in their mission and how they see things. So yeah, I think that was again really helpful for me and not information I had prior to the class.
Right. And then so let's talk about scenario day. So scenario day is pretty intensive. We actually bring in people like, producer Mike. Sometimes
Hmm.
I fill in because we were just a little short, and I actually have gotten some decent comments about my acting skills, whatever that
Stellar.
may be.
They're stellar. Yes.
But
Spot
so
on.
what we try and do is we try and give real world incidents, be a virtual thing, but make it as real as we can to kind of put a little bit of pressure on you, just to kind of give you that, like, hey, this could be what it's like. So how did you feel, up to scenario day? Was there some nervousness, the preparation, and then what was it like for you during that day?
Yeah. So sure, nervousness, right? But I will say at the end of the day, you learn so much from going through scenarios, right? And so there was, yeah, mix. Like I was nervous, but certainly excited to see what it would be like. I will absolutely agree with you that they are very realistic, and acting skills are spot on. Um, I did get, I'm gonna call it the red and blue scenario.
Mhm,
I don't know what you call it. But I actually was in, I think I was initially like a coach, for an officer who was the primary
mhm,
in the scenario. And you were doing a lot of hanging up, and forcing someone to choose red or blue. And I remember, at one point saying to the officer, "Don't pick a color. Like you're going to get it wrong. Don't pick a
right,
color."
right,
um, and she was getting so frustrated with your continuing to hang up. And it was almost as a coach, like, starting to realize not only did I have to, like, think through what the best approach was for the individual, but also, like, to manage her frustration because she was like she had it,
right.
with, like, I don't know, the 10th hang up or something, right? And I remember at one point she was like, "You're the mental health professional, you talk to them." I was like, "Okay, like, if they will, like, I'll certainly give it a try." But yeah, I just, like, I was like, wow, she's really frustrated with this case in particular. And then obviously there were a lot of elements of mental illness in that scenario in
Right,
particular. So um, yeah, it was great. I do remember feeling like it lasted an eternity,
right,
that it lasted so long. And again, to like on my previous experience, I had done crisis work in the past as a clinician, but that was a different level. And just the time, right? And being able to like stay present and in that moment for that amount of time was a lot different than I had ever, a lot different than anything else had been exposed to. So, super appreciative of the scenarios. I learned a ton, from my team, how we worked together, to the feedback. All in all, it was obviously I remember a lot about it, even 2+ years later.
right, right. Yeah, so that's something we try and do because it's like the crisis world is so unique, but it's something where when you get in that situation, it's almost like you lose track of time, and time just kind of
Yes.
stops for you, but it's
Yeah.
still going on, right? And
Hmm.
even though our scenarios, I'm not gonna tell how long they are, they're not as long as a real incident, but you kinda
Right.
get that feeling, right? Like, "Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I've been at this for, like, almost 2 hours?"
Yes. Yeah. Right. So it's just about like maintaining again that presence for that amount of time and thinking through like what other directions. There's so much to take in, I think, during that time, and really having it being simulated as live and intense. And I had just never considered the time piece, I think, till you're in it. And really being able to realize like, yeah, this does take a lot of skill to manage, um,
Right.
for that duration.
And I always try and say, not that I've ever ran a marathon, but, it's almost like you're in a marathon, right? Like, it's, "When is this thing going to end, and how much
Mhm.
longer do I have?" You know, it's just that feeling, and then a lot of times you just, again, like I said, you lose track of that time. You may get off the phone and you've been in it for 6 hours, and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I've
Yeah.
been here for 6 hours."
Yeah, I'll share too. I had a call out in which, and again, I know, there I've read about a lot of call outs, and that have lasted days or weeks or whatnot, right? That are really time intensive. But I had one that, I don't know, we were probably like close to 7 hours ish, 6 to 7 hours of time, um, and it ended safely. The individual was taken into custody, uh, and I remember, as we were leaving the scene, it was myself and a primary negotiator, and we were walking down like a very long driveway, and I am just like giddy. And I'm like, yes, we did it, right? It was so awesome. Um, a positive outcome for everybody. There's family there, everyone is. And he looked at me, and it's like, like 2 o'clock in the morning at this point. And he looked at me and he said, take care of yourself this weekend. And I was like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
this is great. What there's no I'm good. I'm happy. This is awesome. And he said, you need to take care of yourself this weekend. And I got home. He's like, you have to rest, like drink water, all the like basic needs, attending to those. And I was like, listen, like, I'm a behavioral health professional. I got this.
Yeah.
Um, and the next day, like the best that I can describe it is like feeling like I got hit by a truck. I was completely um just drained of all like physical energy. Again, I too have never ran a marathon, but that's all I can. It is exactly like what you said. Um, I had no idea that was going to be an outcome. Right. Again, we had a positive outcome. It felt like a win. There was like a lot of great things that happened, but still, this the duration of time and like being on for that long. Yeah, the next day was rough.
Yeah, and again, that's like, again, unless you've experienced that, you can't really describe it, right? So I think that's something for you new negotiators. You have to realize that, and it's funny because I just taught a class, and this person gave me a really good analogy. Is like, you know what? When you build that resiliency, you just don't walk up there and bench 350 pounds. You have to train
Mhm.
yourself for that, right? So you have to do what you said. You have to drink that water, get the rest, make sure you're eating right, doing the right exercise, all that stuff, because that's going to help you when these incidents happen. Build that resiliency up. Lift those weights, kind of a thing. And so when it does happen, you're kind of somewhat prepared, and you just got to maintain that routine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, the emotional tool, again, like you train, you do these scenarios, you read, you learn. Um, I don't know that I was like completely prepared for that. Like you said, I don't think you really realize until you've done it before, um, just the impact that can have on you.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things because you're so emotionally involved in it, and like you said, you're
Yes.
like, you're into it right now, right? You are into that incident, and you're
Mhm.
giving all your energy, all your concentration, and 6, 7, 8 hours. That's a lot to give into, and then you're on that high. You're riding that high for probably a couple more hours, right?
Mhm.
And then when that low hits, it's like you just hit the bottom of that roller coaster ride, and that's where it's at, and your stomach is still up, and then you're down, kind of a thing.
Mhm. Yeah. And he knew he had been on the roller coaster, right? He
Right.
knew what, probably the next couple days were gonna be like for me. And I had to go back to him and say, like, "I appreciate your advice, and looking out and being a good teammate," because I really, yeah, did not have the realization. Again, I knew how much it was taking in the moment, right? There was a lot of collaboration, a lot of work happening, um, but the effects then the next day, yeah, didn't have that realization until I was in it.
So I think we're at a good spot to take a break. So we're going to take a break at the Crisis Cop podcast.
Thought about a career in voiceover? Need a great, cost-effective on-hold message for your organization or business? Don't know where to start? Check out The Voice Farm, your one-stop shop for voiceover needs. Check it out now by accessing The Voice Farm at voicefarmers.com and see what difference can be made with a company that is truly outside the box. From the Voice Box, voicefarmers.com. That's voicefarmers.com.
Wouldn't it be cool if your advertising could last forever? It can with perpetual advertising. Here's how it works. Unlike TV or radio ads, where every instance the ads are broadcast, they're only played once and lost forever. Perpetual advertising could have repeat exposure and replayability weeks, months, and even years after they're inserted in a podcast. So even if a podcast is a few years old, your ads will still be impactful to repeat listeners, as well as new listeners. This gives your advertising dollar the most bang for the buck. Find out more about perpetual advertising at twoguystalking.com/sponsors.
Have you got a cool voice? Do you like to act? Are you quick when it comes to thinking on your feet? Want to help propel the future of training crisis negotiators across the globe and foster the future of law enforcement? We need you. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what's on your plate. We want your voice to help us evolve the way that law enforcement interacts and succeeds when it comes to crisis negotiation. Ready to get started? Access BlueBaggersProject.com and start your role-playing voice adventure today. BlueBaggersProject.com. That's BlueBaggersProject.com.
Welcome back to the Crisis Cop podcast. Joining me today is Megan Taft, and we've been just talking about her experience as a student in the basic crisis negotiation course. So just kind of circling back, we were talking about your recent incident you had, and you'd mentioned that you were coaching, and it's something I think we kind of forgot to talk about when we were talking about different things in class, is the importance of learning all the different positions. Because I think sometimes, whether it be Hollywood or wherever it is, I think people just think, okay, it's just that one person, that one negotiator, and it's way more than that. There's an entire team. So if you would just want to touch on like all the different things we learned about, like all the different positions and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the team roles in particular during the course were really helpful for me to understand. I too probably had an understanding like it was just one person in a hot seat trying to solve what was going on. And so, really understanding the team roles and how they contribute, even though as a behavioral health professional, I may not be in each of these roles. Again, it's good to know all the moving pieces and how that works. Um, I think too, it's evolving in terms of behavioral health professionals on teams, right? What does that look
Right.
like? What is their role? I've had opportunities as part of the team to be a scribe or write things down or get additional, maybe behavioral health information that I found out and be able to go back to my team and not just be like, oh, he's got antisocial, personality disorder, but what
Right.
does that mean? And how might we talk to him differently with that knowledge, right? Or talking to family. I had a case not that long ago where I was able to talk to family and really understand the individual's like military history and some diagnoses that were a result of that, time served. And so yeah, again, knowing everybody's role, but also as in my role, how do I contribute effectively? I think is, continues to be an evolving question on our
Right.
team. I also, in my role, have helped do some training on our team. So we do like quarterly trainings and being able to bring topics that may help, refresh active listening skills or different activities and those sorts of things. So again, I think obviously every role on the team is extremely valuable in those moments. And so becoming familiar with that and knowing how each of them can contribute is helpful for outcomes ultimately.
Yeah, and it's something like I said, I think it's fairly newer now. I'm sure there's some teams that have been doing it for a while, but just the whole mental health aspect, having that position on the team, and then just trying to figure out from the team wise, like what does that look like? How does that fit into our team, and how does that work? But I think it's refreshing to have that outside perspective of, because unfortunately sometimes in law enforcement we we it's just law enforcement. We think like law enforcement officers. Sometimes that's the only perspective we have, but bringing that mental health aspect onto the team, I think is really beneficial. And like you said, just being able to be used, maybe you're talking to the family or whatever that may be, just diagnosing different things or medications, that kind of thing. I think it's just another resource that really worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think I told you while I had, a sergeant who thought it was a good idea, merging mental health, culture with law enforcement, it has been happening, but still not always an easy transition, right? And the
Right.
two cultures, and then we add like high intense events with tactical teams and other folks being involved. And so, yeah, I think while my team has made me feel incredibly valued, and that I am contributing positively. I'm very grateful for that. I also, when I show up on a scene, not everybody necessarily knows who I am, or
Right.
they may
Right.
have questions, right, about who is she, which is fine. And part of what we work through, or why we train collaboratively with our tactical side, so that I can be a face that people can feel comfortable with and confident with on scenes. So yeah, I think merging the cultures is still always interesting and challenging. But again, I'm super grateful that my team has found my role and contributions to be valuable.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's more than just having like, oh, we can just call that person on the phone. I think actually being part of the team and showing up to the training, showing up to the call outs, I think that's way more valuable and a lot better use of the resource than, oh, we'll just call that person on the phone.
I could not agree with that more. I served in a role of kind of being more like just call, or that like consultant sort
Right.
of role for some time. And yeah, I think it was like a lot of like tripping up, like what is she supposed to do, and like it was really unclear. And then at one point, probably after I'd gone through the training, it was really like, no, we're embracing her as a member of this team. And so training together, and being on the same call out that everybody else is on, and really integrating me as a team, being a part of that. So I see the value in that as well, because it's about those relationships that you create, and knowing, how you can lean on somebody in those moments that can be really helpful.
So now that you've kind of gotten your feet a little bit wet in the negotiation world, where do you want to go, or where do you want to take this, or what interests have you found that you like might want to explore further?
Yeah. I told you when we first started, I was really unsure. And now I feel like I am in it, and I read about it and listen to podcasts, and I'm really interested in just like communication in general, and crisis work in general. In my new position at Wayne State University, I have the opportunity to train clinicians in crisis work. And again, that is not something that most clinicians get during schooling, which is always like, shocking to people.
Right.
You don't get a ton of that when you go to school. So I'm teaching a class at the university level as well. So we're hoping to equip students more as they graduate with some of these skills. We, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, usually are trained in like motivational interviewing, which does have some overlap into active listening skills or more
Mm.
pie skills. But it is we have found as we continue to train more clinicians, those active listening skills are newer concepts to them. Again, we may be calling it a bit different, but early on in the crisis, as a means to de-escalate, absolutely, ALS skills are super important. And so knowing what those are, and then maybe as the crisis is starting to de-escalate, we may use more MI skills, for example, in clinical work or crisis intervention work. So yeah, my hope is that we continue to get to train clinicians in these concepts as well, and really expand and obviously improve. Ultimately goal is to improve crisis interventions, right?
Right.
That we avoid things escalating to even needing negotiators if we can be more proactive in some of our approaches.
But you've kind of touched on a couple incidents, but is there like maybe one or two incidents, or maybe even your first call out to where like, okay, now this is all clicking, going through the training and then actually being here, it makes sense now, or was there something that kind of stuck in your head?
Yeah. So we had a call out, and again, I was more in a role of, um, I was one of the first people there. So while I eventually assumed more of a role, like how a behavioral health like teammate should look, initially I was probably doing more of like that secondary coach-ish role.
Right.
And so yeah, like talking and even a primary at one point, talking to somebody directly, because I showed up on the scene and basically the family handed me the phone. And so again, and we were able to transition eventually. It was a long call out. It was a call out that, yeah, a lot of things were clicking, but also like a lot of, um, it was very eye-opening to me, and a debrief that happened later, right? Because again, in the moment you can feel like you're prepared and
Mhm.
you've read and you're skilled and all the things, and then we went through the debrief and it was like, gosh, I felt like even in the moment there was a lot of things we could do better or differently, which I think that's part of it, right? You're
Right.
constantly learning and evolving and
Right.
figuring out, how to do it better. But also realizing like, man, I was really lacking in knowledge. Again, really back to that like tactical side, not wanting to say or do or create an exit plan that went against maybe what law enforcement had in mind. And so that collaboration was key. And again, we created some processes afterwards about how obviously to improve those. Uh, Overall, had a positive outcome. So that was great.
Yeah.
But we had some, his phone died at one point, and figuring out how to get him a charger and a
Right.
throw phone, just like some of those things like, wow, we've learned about it and now like it's time. This is, or we trained for it. This is all really happening.
Right. And it, I love that everybody trains, but let's just be honest, sometimes it's not the real world. You have to have that experience, right? That real world experience, because it's a different level. You can't really ratchet that training up to where it's really like, hey, by the way, this is really life saving. Like this person's life is on the line. We had to do certain things. And then, like you said, the things that happen real world, like sometimes you like wouldn't believe the stuff that happens. Like, nah, there's no way that happened. No, yeah, it actually did happen in real world. That's what happened to us because it's that Murphy's Law thing, right? That's
Yeah.
just stuff you can't prepare for that, right? You just can't train that. It just happens.
Yeah. And I think it's all about, in those moments, how do you pivot, right? And that's crisis work. I think in general, it's all
Right.
about the gray and these moments of like, okay, that wasn't what we learned, or our throw phone was supposed to work.
Right.
It's not,
Right.
So yeah, I think it's always about like recovering and pivoting, and I think about that even through active listening, or when you say something, you're like, gosh, I really wish I wouldn't have said it in that
Right.
way. And we all do it, right? Or it's all, it's part of it, and it's part of the human experience. Like the whole, being able then to like recover and pivot and learn. Yeah, I think that's what makes you better, and just being able to continue to grow. Um, Again, all a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the toughest things to teach students is just that fear of, I'm gonna say that one wrong thing. And
Yeah.
realizing that, yeah, you probably will, but we're all
Well,
humans and it's recoverable, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
for the most part, it's recoverable and you're just gonna have to roll with it. Pivot, like you said, right? You gotta pivot
Hmm.
and move on. Don't really take, oh
Yeah.
my God, I can't believe I just said that, right? And then now
Yeah.
we're just like stuck on that for the next 20 minutes instead of just pivoting and hey, let's move on. We made a mistake. Let's go somewhere else, right?
Yeah. I also think though it's like a different way to conceptualize like connection, when you make like you really using those mistakes as opportunities, right? Because most of the time when we're talking to someone, they too feel like they've failed in some regard, or they've made a mistake in some aspects, right? And so when I can connect as a human with like, gosh, I make mistakes too, and even if it's just I said something wrong, or it's a simple apology, or those sorts of, because again, like you said, it's going to happen. But it really using those moments as opportunities, like reestablish connection or just speak human to human to somebody, I think is powerful. Doesn't have to be like a like wallowing in that mistake that you've made, but really just using it as an opportunity.
Yeah, and you brought up a good word, that connection, because as a negotiator, that's what we're trying to do, right? We have to build that connection, that rapport with our subject. And I think I don't know if we said this now, but I think the best analogy is it's almost like two people just sitting at a bar having a beer. That's the kind of conversation at the end of the day we want to have.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think as we teach, as I like continue to teach, we really focus on connection and even like returning to connection throughout conversation, right? And the importance of that. I'll borrow, I think Gary, either during our class or I heard him at one point mention that and I'm going to steal this saying, that problem solving is a privilege. And I'm like, gosh, that's really powerful, right? So many of us enter into any sort of crisis or negotiation with like solve. Let's get this taken care
Right.
of. Um, and like, wow, no, you really without connection and that established connection, problem solving is really ineffective. But that's where we tend to go pretty quickly, and you usually feel it when you've done it too quickly.
Right. Right.
um, and again, it's okay. Like I feel like sometimes I've thrown it out like a solution out there. And if it's shot down, it's like, okay, then we're not there yet. Right. And really using that to go back to your staircase or go back to where, you know, reestablish connection or what that may look like. Uh, but again, worth a try, just doesn't always work.
Right. And that's something you brought to like problem solving. That's something that in the law enforcement world, unfortunately, we have to do that every day because we have so many problems we have to solve. And then what we tend to realize is when we're actually in that crisis and doing that crisis communication, that's the absolute worst thing we can do is try and problem solve it. Right. So again, I like that. Like you have to earn that right to problem solve. And what does that mean
Mhm.
is you have you have to give some give back, right? You have to be able to build that connection before you can even entertain problem solving.
Mhm. Yeah, and while I've seen it in the law enforcement world, I will also say it's in the clinician world too,
Yeah.
especially doing crisis work, right? You're going again, similarities and going from one thing to the next and feeling like, okay, I know what the solution is. Like sometimes we're like, okay, we know this resource or we know what you could do to fix whatever concern
Right.
you may have. But again, if the individual is not there, it just becomes a power struggle at that point because you don't have the connection to be able to do it.
Right. Right. Any other incidents that you can talk about that kind of pop out in your head recently or
Yeah. Um, I think something else I was maybe knew it happened, but maybe not as prepared for is we did have an individual die by suicide on a scene. He actually had died even prior to us going, but we were unaware of that, prior to getting on the scene. And
Right.
we're still doing everything in our power to attempt to communicate with him, and you know, all the tactile things from throw phones to loudspeakers to all, it was like how we usually would, right? Um, I think those scenes, like I don't, I, I haven't been around many, but they still are just difficult. They are just really hard. Um, to see family, to see individuals affected, to ultimately know like this is the end result for someone. Um, that's hard. And again, I think you can train and prepare, and
Right.
that does happen, right? And that could be a possibility. It doesn't lessen the impact, though. It's still, um, it's just a really difficult situation to
Right.
be
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the last scenes I was on, we had one where that we talked to this guy for 4 something hours, and at the
Wow.
end of the day, he died by suicide, and it was tough, like, especially for that negotiator because he was trying
Yeah.
so hard to build that connection and trying to give alternatives, and then at the end of the day, it was that guy's choice, and it's again,
Mhm.
you can train for it, but until it happens, there's no real training, and that's just really the reality of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that's good information to remember. I think I've also been very strategic. I tend when I'm on scenes to, be in a bus or be kind of away from what's happening, and strategically, I know for my well-being, not witnessing that, not seeing that is really important to me. Um, because yeah, I know it can be an outcome, and it can be very difficult, and just not like hearing it is enough, knowing
Right,
that's the outcome. But for me, it's like that boundary of really not exposing myself to it. It's just part of my wellness, and like
right.
trying to create longevity in this work. That's a step I take for me.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because we don't obviously, we've had a lot of great advances in technology and all that, but there's also some downfalls too, like what you just said with all this drone footage and everything else. But before we would hear it and not see it. Now, unfortunately,
Mhm.
we can watch it as it happens
Yeah,
live, and that's not easy to do either.
not at all. Yeah, right. And I always am like very intentional to check in with law enforcement partners when they don't always have the choice that I have, obviously, right, to make the decision to step back or remove myself from those sorts of situations. But yeah, there are folks obviously who do witness that and are right there. Um, and I just, as a behavioral health professional, you want to make sure I check in, and knowing, I think sometimes knowing, again, going back to the fact that I'm on a team, sometimes their willingness to, um, share really what they're going through is that I have more opportunity for that, or to provide support in those instances, which again I find is part of my role. Obviously, I don't like do ongoing therapy with them in those
Right, right.
moments, but it is about just checking in, and maybe recommending that if that's helpful. Yeah, very difficult situations.
And again, just another reason to have a mental health person on your team, because for that reason alone is to be able to check up on the team. And unfortunately, in law enforcement, we tend to stick with people we know, and we don't like to talk about things. But having that person on the team, having them embedded in the team, that it builds that trust factor, right? Now I'm more open to talk to Megan because Megan's my teammate. Oh, by the way, Megan's also a mental health person too, right? So that always helps.
Yeah, I think too, including being included on debriefs has been a very another way to not only offer potentially different perspective, and again everybody can come to the table with different perspective or ways of doing things, but also getting the opportunity then to kind of look around the table, and check in with officers, or see how they may be doing after difficult events. I have the I am, I feel fortunate that I'm welcomed in on those in that space. to be able, obviously, to talk through that a bit differently.
Yeah, and that's super important. So when we talk about debriefs, what we mean is after the incident, everybody gets together and we just discuss the incident, right? We talk about the goods, the bads, how we feel, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's so important that everybody's included in that debrief, just because there may be information that I didn't know that the tactical team knew, or I didn't know that the mental health person knew. So just getting all those
Yeah.
perspectives and actually having a good debrief, talking about it, fixing what needs to be fixed, praising what was good. That's super important. That's why it's so important to do those good debriefs.
Yeah, and then train together. I think that's what often comes out of the debriefs for us too, is then how do we train differently together. And for me, it's being able to learn more about that tactical side when we have the opportunity to train. Um, and I value that time together, because I think again, it just makes us a stronger team overall when instances arise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just a couple things. What advice could you give some potential students, or maybe someone that's kind of contemplating, maybe I should take this class, or maybe I should explore this negotiations field. What would be some advice you could give?
Yeah, I think with the class in general, my advice is to take it all in and then figure out how you continue to grow. That is probably my biggest takeaway. Because again, I think the class is a foundation, and it is about how you continue to develop your own skill and grow. Um, I've had the opportunity to, reach out to different officers and be like, hey, would you consider this? Because I've seen them do really good, CIT work or crisis work, and negotiation something that they may consider. I do think that there's like potentially like a personality type. Uh, they,
Yeah, yeah.
fit more with the work. Um, or ultimately people who just listen well, or who are willing to develop skills to listen well. So um, yeah, I think those are kind of my takeaways and just pieces of advice that I've learned in my very short time, that I'm not sure I can quite give advice yet. But
It's
yeah.
funny because it like the amount of people that have been recruited into the field, I think is 'cause a lot of people just don't realize like, oh, I could actually do this. I think it's the people that
Mhm.
recognize, hey, you're pretty good at this. You might want to try this. It's astonishing how many stories I've heard about that. Like, hey, I was
Mm,
actually approached by my sergeant or my captain or a fellow negotiator, and they said, hey, you should put in for this. I think that's
mhm,
really a unique thing in law enforcement.
mm. Okay. Yeah, and again, new to me. But I have had, some officers who I've had the opportunity to work with, who I've seen, either co-respond with or be on scenes with, and you can tell, like, oh yeah, you could probably do this quite well.
Right, right, absolutely. So any parting words or any other words of advice? Maybe trying to convince that mental health person, hey, you
Mm,
might want to get on that team or look into that.
yeah. So first, I want to thank you. One of your questions was around mentorship, and I haven't had the opportunity to read books from you, listen to you speak, and obviously stay in contact with you since my class. So I just want to extend that gratitude to you for
Thank you.
continuing to be supportive of everyone who is going into this field. As my advice to, or even convincing mental health professionals to be a part of teams, is that your voice is valuable. Most obviously, like, behavioral health professionals are going into this work, um, similar to I did, to see different outcomes, and to help people gain better understanding of when mental health is present on scenes. And so, just really understanding, I didn't know before I went into this how to contribute, but I will tell you that I do feel like I have contributed, and I feel like my team feels like that as well. And that my advice to future behavioral health professionals considering this is that your voice is valuable, your skills are helpful, and you can really help shape different outcomes ultimately, and hopefully more positive ones.
All right, Megan. Well, thanks for your time. I'm really excited to hear what you're going to be doing further in the field of crisis negotiation. I appreciate your kind words. One of the things, I was lucky and blessed. I had a great mentor, and I just think you have to just keep going. Like I
Mhm.
had a great mentor. I want to be a mentor, and then pass it on to maybe you, and maybe somewhere down the line you can be that mentor to someone else. I think that's what it's really all about. And I'm looking forward to keeping our connections and looking forward to seeing where your career goes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me today.
All right. Thank you. Again, I want to thank Megan for just coming on the podcast. And I also want to thank everyone who's been listening to the Crisis Cop podcast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you listen, make sure you're passing it on to your other fellow negotiators or just anyone that's interested in the world of negotiations. I'm your host, Pat Dorian, and this is the Crisis Cop podcast.